Hello, welcome back to Bioclass Bites. In this video, we are going to talk about the three domains of life. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. This is an image of a common cuttlefish with scientific name Sepia officinalis. They are one of my favorite invertebrates, and together with squids, octopuses, and nautilus, they belong in class Cephalopoda. So they are such extremely intelligent marine creatures. They have one of the largest brain-to-body ratio, and that allows them to thrive in their ecosystems. What makes me like them is that they have this great ability for camouflage. They can actually swiftly change the colors and textures of their skin to camouflage or to perfectly blend with their environment. So a simple Google search will bring you a lot of information about cuttlefish, and hopefully you will also like them. In the previous videos, we've talked about the nature of taxonomy and systematics. We also talked about the Linnaean system of classification, including binomial nomenclature, the standard way of naming organisms. Now, for this video, we will be talking about the domains of life. While for the last video of this series, we will talk about the next taxonomic rank after that, the different kingdoms of life. So to give you an idea, of what we will tackle today, I recommend that you watch this video from Ricochet Science entitled Domains and Kingdoms of Life. I'll provide the link in the description below. The three-domain system adds a level of classification above the kingdoms present in the previously used 5 or 6 kingdom systems. So if you still remember our lesson, no, we've talked about how the changes, what are the changes in the classification of living things we have seen over time. So for the kingdoms, the establishment of the kingdoms, they note that the highest level of classification or the highest taxonomic rank was kingdoms from 4, 5, 6, 7 kingdom system. However, they decided to include another level of organization or another taxonomic rank above kingdoms, and those are the domains. So why is it important? This classification system, the domains, recognizes the fundamental divide. Okay? The fundamental divide between the two prokaryotic groups, Archaea and bacteria. So we've also talked about that. They decided to create this domain system that separates the prokaryotes from the eukaryotes. So I hope you still remember that prokaryotes do not have a distinct membrane-bound nucleus, prokaryotes, while eukaryotes, they have a distinct membrane-bound nucleus within their cells. However, domain Archaea is noted to be more closely related to domain Eukarya than it is to domain bacteria. So there's that divide, okay? There's that divide between the prokaryotic groups, bacteria and Archaea. Okay, so they created that system to establish that. Our taxonomic, our phylogenetic trees, our taxonomic trees, our taxonomic systems of classifications are still continuously evolving, continuously changing as we discover more and more information about the living things within our planet. Here are the three domains of life and brief descriptions of each. So for domain bacteria, so this one is a group of prokaryotic organisms, okay? So they are small, microscopic, and they do not have a distinct nucleus. The second domain is domain Archaea, right? They also include multiple kingdoms under this domain. They are also prokaryotic, no distinct nucleus. Okay. However, they live in extreme environments within our planet, such as salty lakes and boiling hot springs, and we will see more examples in the next slides. The third domain would be domain Eukarya. So these are the eukaryotes. They have a distinct nucleus within their cells. So that includes notable kingdoms such as kingdom plantae, so those are your multicellular photosynthetic eukaryotes. Kingdom fungi, these are your saprophytic, okay, organisms, such as mushrooms and other organisms. Kingdom animalia, so these are multicellular heterotrophic eukaryotes that need to feed on others. And then you have kingdom Protista. So these are unicellular eukaryotes that share animal-like structure, animal-like characteristics. Okay, so we will learn more about these kingdoms in the next video. So again, this one is another table showing us the characteristics of each domain. So for domain bacteria, which includes kingdom bacteria, these are your prokaryotes, unicellular, microscopic organisms with cell walls. Okay, they are mostly the decomposers within an ecosystem. Some could be parasitic, okay, and some could be pathogenic or disease-causing organisms. Okay. Um, Next, kingdom Archaea, domain Archaea has kingdom Archaea. These are your prokaryotes again, unicellular microscopic organisms. They also differ biochemically from domain bacteria. So in an ecosystem, these are your decomposers. They recycle nutrients such as carbon and nitrogen. They're found in extreme environments such as swamps, sewage, and even animal digestive tracts. They are also extreme halophiles. They could inhibit salty environment, and extreme thermophiles that could inhibit hot acidic environment. Then domain Eukarya, okay, again, no, it has the following kingdoms: Protists, Plantae, Fungi, and Animalia. So these are your eukaryotes. They have a distinct nucleus. Some could be unicellular, some could be multicellular. For Protists, again, no, these are your planktons, zooplanktons. They're found in marine and freshwater ecosystems. Some protists can actually cause diseases, or they can also be pathogenic. Okay? Plantae, again, they are photosynthetic organisms. They have alternation of generations. They can be terrestrial. They mostly thrive on land. They're known as the primary producers of an ecosystem. So we've talked about that in bioenergetics. They are an important source of oxygen in the Earth's atmosphere as a byproduct of photosynthesis. Fungi are your eukaryotes, okay? They do not make their own food. They're mostly heterotrophic, and most are saprophytic. They feed on decaying matter of organisms and of matter. They have cell walls made up of chitin. They are decomposers in an ecosystem. Some could be parasitic or pathogenic. So when we say pathogenic, they cause diseases. Right? Some form important symbiotic relationships with other organisms. So humans have taken advantage of that, of their characteristics. Some have been used to create products, okay, food products and medical products or pharmaceutical products, mostly responsible for spoilage of food and crop loss. Kingdom Animalia, so these are your eukaryotic organisms that are mostly multicellular. They're also heterotrophs. They cannot make their own food, therefore they need to feed on other organisms. Most of them can move through muscular contraction. In an ecosystem, they are mostly the consumers. Some could be specialized as herbivores, some could be omnivores, or others are carnivores. They could also be top predators or detritus feeders. Before we go further into the classifications and representative organisms of the three domains, I recommend that you watch this video from Crash Course entitled Old and Odd, Archaea, Bacteria, and Protists. They will provide deeper information and more comprehensive discussions about these domains. So I'll provide the link in the description below. The first domain is domain Archaea. Okay, so most of this we've already mentioned a while ago. They are prokaryotic, they do not have nuclear membrane, they have no nucleus, and they are mostly unicellular organisms. They reproduce through asexual means, and they were traditionally classified as Archaebacteria. So they were used to be called that until they were placed under domain Archaea. What's notable about this domain is that they are known as the oldest species of organisms within our planet. Okay, scientists were able to see their unique ancient evolutionary history, and that allowed them to classify them or to note them as the oldest species of organisms. So how do we know that? It is because organisms under this domain are mostly living in extreme environments. Okay, extreme environments. And those are the environments that reflect the environments when the Earth was younger than it is now. So, so before um, any of the other species appeared, we already had domain Archaea. So examples of those archaeal organisms are methanogens. So they produce methane, gas methane. They have halophiles, okay, which live in very salty water, okay, salty lakes, salty environment. And we also have thermoacidophiles under this domain. They thrive in acidic, high temperature water. So these are the examples of extreme environments in which they live, and these are also the extreme environments when the Earth was quite young. So that allowed, these are the evidence that allowed scientists to note that they are known as the quite as the oldest species of organisms that we have. So examples of those again are um, Archaea found in volcanic hot springs. Okay, we can find Archaea here. Acidic mine drainage can be found. We can find archaeal organisms here. Hot water in Yellowstone National Park. Okay, and we can also find methanogenic archaea within the guts of termites. Okay, so those are example representative organisms of domain Archaea. Next would be domain bacteria. So they are still prokaryotic, still no nuclear membrane, and they are unicellular and they also reproduce through asexual means. They are what we know as traditionally as bacteria. So examples of bacteria are your cyanobacteria. These are your photosynthesizing bacteria. They are also quite an old species. Okay, so they are related to eukaryotic plants and algae. Spirochates, these are your gram-negative bacteria that can cause diseases. So these are pathogenic organisms such as syphilis and Lyme disease. And then you have your actinobacteria. These are gram-positive bacteria such as Bifidobacterium animalis, which are present in the human large intestine. So the representative organisms of bacteria are grouped or categorized based mostly on their shapes. So you have your spherical bacteria, and they are called cocci, plural, singular coccus, okay, from their spherical shape. So they occur in single or in chains of two or more cells. So they resemble bunch of grapes. So you have here another spear shape. So this is streptococci, seen under the microscope. The next common shape of bacteria would be rod shape. So they are called bacilli, plural, singular bacillus. They're usually solitary, but some could form rods, such as this rod-shaped bacteria. Okay, this one is E. coli, rod-shaped bacteria. Then the last common shapes of prokaryotes are spiral. So these are your spirochetes. They are spiral in shape. They look like corkscrew. Okay, such as this spirochete T. pallidum. The last domain is domain Eukarya. So these are your eukaryotic organisms, okay? So within their cells, they have a membrane-bound nucleus and other membrane-bound organelles. So they can reproduce through sexual or asexual reproduction. They could also be unicellular or multicellular. So eukaryotic cells are generally bigger than prokaryotes. We've talked about this in our previous lessons on animal and plant cells. They represent a tiny minority of all living things, but they are quite larger in size, and they are most of them are macroscopic, so they can be seen with our naked eyes. Their collective worldwide biomass is estimated to be equal to that of prokaryotes. So eukaryotes we've mentioned this, these are your plants, fungi, animals, okay, insects, and all that. So these are the three domains, three domain trees, okay, that shows us that Archaea is mostly related to Eukarya than it is to bacteria. Okay, so again another symbiogenetic tree of living organisms, that Archaea is actually quite more related to Eukarya than the rest of the domain bacteria. Now, we cannot talk about the three domains without learning about the concept of the endosymbiotic theory. Okay, so we will look into that in deeper detail. But before we do, I recommend that you watch this video entitled Endosymbiotic Theory. I'll provide the link in the description below. So, symbiogenesis or the endosymbiotic theory is an evolutionary theory that explains to us the origin of eukaryotes. Okay, how did eukaryotes form? If most of the oldest organisms in our planet are prokaryotic organisms, so how did Archaea eventually evolve to have to have eukaryotic organisms? So basically, it tells us that organelles that distinguish eukaryotic cells evolve through symbiosis. Okay, and we've learned this in our lesson on um, ecosystem. Okay, that organisms can have relationship or interconnected relationship or deep relationship with each other. We call that symbiosis. So it tells us, the endosymbiotic theory tells us that eukaryotic cells evolved from the symbiosis of prokaryotes in the past. Okay, and by the way, this one is an image of a death cap mushroom, quite a poisonous mushroom, with the scientific name Amanita phalloides. So you can actually visit Arizona State University Ask a Biologist page about the endosymbiotic theory. I'll provide the link in the description below. So the endosymbiotic theory tells us that the organelles mitochondria and chloroplast, as well as other organelles, were used to be free-living prokaryotes. So they used to be separate organisms from the cell, from a eukaryotic cell. However, they were taken into a cell through the process of phagocytosis. So phago here means feeding cell feeding, okay? That happened around 1.5 billion years ago. So that process is called endosymbiosis, that the feeding of or the inclusion of these separate organisms into a bigger cell, we call that phagocytosis in the endosymbiotic theory. So how do we know that? They've seen that modern mitochondria appear to be related to Rickettsiales proteobacteria. So this one is a bacteria, a species of bacteria. So they which are also free living. Okay, they live unicellular existence, while chloroplasts appear to be related to nitrogen fixing cyanobacteria. So this one is also another free living organism. So why is it that we have mitochondria within our eukaryotic cells, and chloroplasts are also found within eukaryotic cells, and they look a lot like this free living prokaryotes? And how do we explain that? So this is how it most probably happened. So the endosymbiotic theory tells us that organisms used to live separately billions of years in the past. They live separately in unicellular existence. However, no, a proto-eukaryote or a primitive eukaryote must have started to engulf the organelles that they have found within their environment. Okay, so they might have engulfed um, um, ancestors of those mitochondria and cyanobacteria within their cells. Okay, so the first event might be here. In a first endosymbiotic event, ancestral eukaryotes must have consumed an aerobic bacteria within its body, and then they start to live in a symbiotic relationship. So it did not this cell did not fully digest that aerobic bacterium, but in fact maintained its own identity within the cell, and they live in symbiotic with each other. So, so that eventually leads to the evolution of the mitochondrion, okay, that we can find today, okay, in the cells of eukaryotes today. Now, in some, aside from the mitochondria, they were also able to, those primitive cells were also able to engulf through phagocytosis photosynthetic bacterium. So those are your cyanobacteria, photosynthetic organisms, okay, that allow them to perform photosynthesis, which eventually leads into the evolution of modern photosynthetic eukaryote. So this could probably the ancestors of your plants, and this could probably the ancestors of fungi, protists, and animals. So this is how they try to explain why in the past we only have primitive organisms, okay, primitive prokaryotes, and then eventually that led through phagocytosis that led into the evolution of your modern day eukaryotes, which can perform photosynthesis, while the others are heterotrophic organisms. So the endosymbiotic theory was first proposed on a paper by Lynn Margulis in 1967 entitled On the Origin of Mitosing Cells. So in her work, she said that eukaryotic cells originated as communities of interacting entities. So this is a community. It has one organism, another organism, then you also have another organism here, and they live um, in a symbiotic relationship. So they benefit each other from their relationship. So this is not predation. This is a symbiotic relationship because they are living with each other. Okay, so she says that eukaryotic cells are communities of interacting entities, including endosymbiotic spirochetes, which eventually develop into eukaryotic flagella and cilia. These are the parts of the cell that allows movement. Her theory that cell organelles such as mitochondria and chloroplast, which were once independent bacteria. So we've mentioned this, that mitochondria, which are related to Rickettsialis proteobacteria, and chloroplast, which are related to cyanobacteria, used to be independent bacteria, independent organisms, until they were able to be engulfed into the cell, and they were able to live within that proto-eukaryote, and then they had a symbiotic relationship. Um, it was only so in the past her work was largely ignored until it becomes widely accepted after it was powerfully substantiated with genetic evidence. Okay, so that's how science works. Sometimes we need further evidence, or most of the time you need more evidence in order for your theory to be recognized. So what are the evidence of symbiosis that we've seen? So again, no, aside from the resemblance of mitochondria with Rickettsialis and chloroplast, are resemblance with cyanobacteria. So some mitochondria and some plastids, such as chloroplast, contain single circular DNA molecules that are similar to other bacteria. Okay. So that's what they found. Okay, so at genetic level, mitochondria still kept its own DNA molecule, and chloroplast still maintained its own molecule. So actually, within a eukaryotic cell, you have three sources of, specifically in plants. Okay, in photosynthetic organisms, it has three sources of DNA: the nuclear DNA, the mitochondrial DNA, and then the DNA found within the chloroplast. For animals, you have your nuclear DNA found in the nucleus and the mitochondrial DNA. Okay, so mitochondria and chloroplast kept their own DNA. By the way, this is an image of an Indian peafowl, Pavo cristatus. So this one is another image, okay, of endosymbiosis. So you have your primitive prokaryotic cell, and then it has the engulfation or invagination of the aerobic bacteria, which eventually evolved to be your mitochondria. So that aerobic bacteria evolved to become the mitochondria. Then eventually that gave rise to your eukaryotic cells, such as animal, fungi, and some protists. Now this one further engulfed photosynthetic bacteria, okay, your cyanobacteria, which eventually becomes the chloroplasts. Okay, so that this group of eukaryotic cells eventually evolved to become your plants. Okay, photosynthetic plants and some protists. So this one is an image of mitochondria, the important energy generators of our cells. We've studied this in animal and plant cells. So they say that mitochondria again evolved from free living, from independent cells. So they used to be like this, but then they were engulfed by this host cell, and then they evolved to become the mitochondria. And they still kept their DNA. Mitochondria have DNA that is different from the DNA of the nucleus. So they retain their own DNA molecule. Okay, so these mitochondria are from cells of a lung tissue of a mammal. So, genome or genetic comparison suggests a close relationship between mitochondria and Rickettsia bacteria. We've mentioned that. And genome comparison suggests a close relationship between chloroplast and cyanobacteria. So this actually shows us the structure of a chloroplast, an organelle chloroplast. And this one is a structure of a cyanobacterium. And we all know no, they're primitive organisms. And we see they have major similarities. They have outer membrane, inner membrane, a nucleoid within, thylakoids, lipid droplets, and ribosomes. So most likely this is the ancestor of your chloroplast, and then they were engulfed, okay, within the cell, and then they still perform their photosynthetic processes, which eventually gave rise to plants and other photosynthetic organisms. Another evidence of endosymbiotic theory is that new mitochondria and plastids, or new mitochondria and chloroplasts, are formed only through binary fission. If you still remember, binary fission is an asexual type of reproduction performed by prokaryotes. Okay? This is a form of reproduction used by bacteria and archaea. So they say through experiments that if you remove the mitochondria, of a cell, that cell cannot make another mitochondria. Okay? If you remove the chloroplast of that cell, the cell cannot make its own chloroplast. So mitochondria can only give rise to mitochondrion can only come from another mitochondrion. Chloroplast can only come from another chloroplast. So the cell does not create its mitochondrion or chloroplast. They can only be passed on through cell division. So again, no, so that's another proof. Aside from mitochondria and chloroplast maintaining their own DNA, they also reproduce through binary fission. Okay? And the cell does not have the means to create new ones if you happen to remove that from that cell. Okay? So this one gives further evidence that the possible ancestors of eukaryotic cells are occurred through endosymbiosis with primitive bacteria. So this one is an image of a common zebra, Equus quagga. Now, this is a video from TED-Ed, no, that tells us in detail, okay, in animated detail of the endosymbiotic theory. So this one hopefully will explain everything that that I've mentioned, and that could also be in an entertaining way. You could also watch this. So I recommend, okay? I'll provide the link in the description below. That ends our video. I hope you learned something new. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and like and share this video. Till next time, goodbye.